There are two reasons that we talked about in our first unit, which were called substitution property and the transitive property. And those two specific properties are going to be important in our next proofs that we're going to be looking at. So once again, we just recently did a transitive property at the top of this page, but this is the way I look at transitive property. It's since A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. Because there's a B in our first statement, and because there's a B in the second statement, what happens is that A transports itself across to C. So transport is like transitive. The substitution property says if A equals B, then B can be substituted in for A. So instead of writing A, we can fill in whatever B equals for A. So as we turn our paper over, here are a couple of proofs to take a look at involving the transitive property and substitution. So what we're given here on this first problem is that the measure of angle 3 equals the measure of angle 8, and then some other information that we're given. We're given that angle 8 and angle 6 are supplementary. And we need to fill in that reason, and it's the definition. Got to spell it right. Of supplementary. Well, since we can say that the angle 8 and angle 6 are supplementary, we can also say that the measure of angle 8 plus the measure of angle 6 equals 180 degrees. And that's still definition of supplementary. So finally what we've got down here is we've got the measure of angle 3 plus the measure of angle 6 equals 180. That's what we're trying to prove here. And what we have written is the measure of angle 8 plus the measure of angle 6. So we've got the measure of angle 6 that we've been trying to prove. But what we don't have, we've got the measure of angle 8 here. So what happens here is that instead of writing the measure of angle 8, we're going to substitute in the measure of angle 3. So that's what happened, and that's going to be our reason here, the substitution. As we take a look at problem number 2, P is parallel to Q, angle 1 is congruent to angle 5, and we want to prove that angle 2 is congruent to angle 5. And the nice thing is, the first two reasons are given to us. So we know that P is parallel to Q, and angle 1 is congruent to angle 5. And in fact, all our statements now are filled in. So the next statement that we see here is that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. So remember, and I'm going to turn my paper just a little bit here, two parallel lines cut by a transversal, then we have angle 1 and angle 2. Well, angle 1 and angle 2 are in between the two parallel lines and on opposite sides. They are alternate interior angles. So we can say that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2 because of the alternate interior angle here. Now, what we know that angle 1 is congruent to angle 5, and angle 1 is congruent to 2. So when I look at this, I actually think of it in more of this format, but I would say that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Oops, I gotta try this again. I would really think of it this way. Angle 2 is congruent to angle 1. Then angle 1 is congruent to angle 5. And what happens is that there's an angle 1 in both of these, so we're transporting the 2 across the 1, and we can get the transitive property. Now, talk to your geometry teacher. I also can see how this one would be substitution, because angle 1 is congruent to angle 5, angle 1 is congruent to angle 2, so instead of writing angle 1 up here, because we're trying to get 2 is congruent to 5, we could substitute in the value of angle 2 for angle 1. I think different geometry teachers would teach it a little bit in a different way. As our last one here on page 18, what reason should go in number 4? So let me scoot this down here so we can see it a little bit better. So we're given that YW is congruent to YZ. I like to mark these up. YW, hard to mark that one up, is congruent to YZ. And sorry about that, I misread the problem. YW is congruent to YZ, and XY is congruent to VY. And we ultimately want to end up with the XZ is congruent to VW, and we have everything in there that we need with the exception of number 4. So if we take a quick look at this here, we have XY plus YZ equals XZ, and then we have VY plus YW equals XZ. And what seems to have happened here is that XY in our given is congruent to VY. So instead of writing XY, we wrote VY. Our YW is in place of the YZ, but instead of writing YZ, we wrote YW. So our reason is going to be the substitution. We substituted those values in to get that statement.